Recording in progress.
Evaluating microaggressions in township, a case study of the gender-based violence secondary victims in Soweto Township. This is the table of contents. Introduction. Historically, most communities in sub-Saharan countries conform to cultural norms that promote patriarchy. Patriarchal norms and values socialized in closed and extended families prolong the disparities between genders. Ideologies not only perpetuate inequality, but are also protected by believers. Women who strongly uphold patriarchal norms not only idealize women who conform to these value systems, but also defend men who demonstrate dominance over their female counterparts, wives, sisters, and friends. Patriarchal women may be less likely to experience cognitive dissonance because of gender roles and social expectations, but this does not make them immune to gender-based violence and microaggressions. They may become secondary victims of gender-based violence through direct exposure or association with direct victims of gender-based violence. South African townships are considered to be Black ethnic Bantu-speaking people's residents who were historically marginalized and excluded from socio-economic opportunities. The exclusion continues to manifest as underrepresentation of women in various economic sectors, which makes many women dependent on males, which might be an intimate partner, spouse, or family member. This economic dependence on their male counterparts leaves them vulnerable and exposed to threats of gendered violence. Gendered violence varies, and the continuum ranges from verbal assaults to physical violence, which are all traumatic events. Some sociocultural aspects of GBV in South Africa are outlined below. Statistics on gendered violence in South Africa show that 77% of men have perpetrated controlling behavior over women. Harmful, harmful, harmful cultural practices in South Africa, such as the genetic testing of adolescent girls between 16 and 18 years. Umomelo, a white clay, is inserted in the girl to test for virginity. Ukutwala is forced marriages through abduction. Polygamy, certain masculinity, is hypermasculinity, resulting in harmful and risky behavior. Harmful cultural norms necessitate stringent intervention strategies aligned with SDG 5, SDG 16, which aim to promote gender equality and peaceful and inclusive societies respectfully. The definition of key concepts: prejudice is negative attitudes towards a person or social group which involves unwarranted dislike or fear predicated on stereotypes. Microaggressions entails implicit and explicit prejudice that can manifest as micro-assaults, micro-insults, and micro-invalidations directed at a person or a social group to cause harm. Safety perception is motivation to avoid loss, which entails a state of protection from present and future harm. Secondary victims. A victim is defined as any person who has suffered physical, mentally, emotionally, economically, or suffered substantial impairment of his or her fundamental rights through acts or omissions that are in violation of the criminal law. This includes indirect victims such as immediate family members, dependents, neighbors, or colleagues of the direct victim. The Declaration of the Principle on Tolerance was established to combat acts of intolerance, xenophobia, exclusion, and discrimination directed against national, ethnic, immigrants, and vulnerable groups in society. The UNESCO Principle on Tolerance are enshrined in the South African Constitution and Policy. The Bill of Rights, Chapter 2 of the South African Constitution, affirms the right to dignity and prohibits discrimination. Prejudice and gender discrimination perpetuate inequality and inhibit women's safety in communities where collective efficacy is compromised. Gender-based violence is a common form of gender discrimination in patriarchal communities worldwide. Harmful patriarchal norms practiced by both men and women are equally harmful, and they promote dehumanization of women, as noted in GBV and femicide cases. GBV tends to involve various types of microaggression that cause tremendous physical harm to victims and psychological harm. GBV results from intergroup behavior whereby men affirm their dominance over females through aggressive methods. In general, women are not safe. Safety is a basic human need, and there are various social factors and physical activities that influence people's safety perceptions. Safety is the protection of women from various forms of harm, violence, and discrimination. Studies do show that 86% of women experience microaggressions such as sexist insult in public. Studies also show that 70% of women in South Africa do not feel safe walking alone in public. Threats to women must be identified, strategically eliminated to achieve gender equality in communities worldwide. The research objectives and question, the study focused on microaggression to examine how it is perceived by secondary victims of GBV residing in a South African township called Soweto. The objectives of the study was to examine and establish women's safety perceptions in townships. Research objectives aim to determine if women participants felt safe in their community. And the most common type of microaggression men commit against women, and how women responded to microaggression directed towards them by men. The open-ended questions asked, where do you feel safe in your community? What is the most common type of microaggression men commit against you? What is the most common type of microaggression men commit against you, women, girls in your family? And fourthly, how do you respond to microaggression directed towards you by men? The research design, this was a qualitative case study that used an interpretive paradigm. Sampling, the study population used secondary victims of GBV residing in Johannesburg municipality in Gauteng province. Target population was the secondary victims of GBV residing in Soweto Township. Participation criteria was permanent residence in Gauteng province, prior direct exposure or close association with GBV victims, must be female between age 18 and 65. The exclusion criteria, minors, unwilling participants, and women who directly experienced GBV within the last 6 months were excluded from the study. Snowball sampling technique was used to recruit 45, but 40 was secured. Data collection and data analysis, interview schedules were administered to participants, and thematic content analysis was conducted using Atlas TI. The social identity theory by Tashfer and Turner was applied to interpret data, and measures of trustworthiness that were applied comprised of credibility, transferability, dependability, and confirmability. Results. The demographics showed that the sample was a homogeneous indigenous ethnicity of 40 Black African females aged between 20 and 64. Results also show that all but one participant experienced microaggression from men in the township. Micro-insults are the most common type of microaggression perpetuated against them and female family members, and only 8 out of 40 participants confronted men who microaggressed against them. Microaggression made all participants feel unsafe in the township. The dominant themes identified were fear of crime, gender, and township. Due to sample size, the findings cannot be generalized. Ethical consideration. Ethical clearance was obtained from UNISA Ethics Committee, and the study adhered to Protection of Personal Information Act number 4 of 2013, and no incentives were given to participants. Conclusions and recommendations. Conclusions. Most secondary victims of GBV were fearful and did not confront men who microaggressed against them. They perceived that the type of microaggression they experienced was gendered violence, often experienced in public across the township context, and contributed to their fear of crime. This study contributes to the discourse against violence, but equally advocates gender equality by highlighting the role of microaggression in the safety perception of women residing in townships. In terms of the social identity theory, the microaggression women experience is a phenomenon of intergroup behavior whereby in-group members, which is men, discriminate against out-group members, which is women, to achieve self-esteem and to maintain the status quo. Recommendations. The following recommendations are informed by the findings, which is police visibility in townships should be intensified to address the fear of crime by secondary victims of GBV. 2, technologies such as drones should be deployed in townships to deter microaggression. And 3, the police service should introduce behavioral corrective programs in township to address sexist attitudes harmful to women. This is the reference list. Acknowledgements. I would like to thank the following people for their contribution, which is women in Gauteng who share their experiences and perceptions of microaggression. Professor David Masulwani for his motivation and academic support. Professor Mabudusha and colleagues for facilitating knowledge sharing in the department, and the UNISA Research Ethics Committee for authorization of the study. And on that note, I'd like to thank you and goodbye.